Kia ora koutou. The following paper collects and expands upon a series of entries I kept in a creative diary, written over a 3-week period as I was composing my most recent work, Deep Field 4, for solo soprano saxophone and 8-channel live electronics, and it also adds some nice pickies. It does not in any way attempt to be a coherent aesthetic manifesto, or even a particularly accurate description of the final work, but it tries to capture as many threads in the evanescent web of associative thinking that occurred during the initial ideation phase of the work as possible. I also want to suggest that music is particularly well positioned to respond to this kind of cross-disciplinary associative thinking, given its ability to provoke synesthetic responses, its semantic precariousness as a communicative medium, and its necessary reliance on the realms of analogy, insinuation, and rather vague mimesis. Day 1. Composition is sometimes described as groping in the darkness, seeking the divine spark of inspiration in the otherwise black void of idealessness. But for me, composition is not groping in the darkness, it's groping in a blinding lightness. Indeed, the blank paper that sits before me has had its inherent treeishness bleached out of it by a bracing bath of hydrogen peroxide, thus attaining its Rauschenbergian whiteness. I have, however, taken the liberty of at least printing some black staff lines onto it, in order to provide me with an orientation or a frame through which we can begin to sense the topography of potential directions. But I like to think that these lines are not too restricting. I can draw a curve that intersects and disrupts the stave's essential Euclidean geometry, as Georges Courtag does so playfully in Yatakok. I see the essential straightness of these lines as tensional forces to subvert, the telegraph wires to my kiraru, as something to creatively push against, not something to submit to. No, composition is no black hole, no Anish Kapoor's Van der Black, the blackest pigment ever made, fashioned from carbon nanotubes, nor is it a Hotore requiem. No, the problem is not so much the lack of ideas as rather the daunting task of sifting through the avalanche of possible threads, connections, sonic ideas, images in my mind, those visual and oral dregs of things recently seen, heard, or wanting to be. In Antony Gormley's installation Blind Light, participants enter a perspex room within a room in which a thick fog of ultrafine mist is saturated with blinding light. As a result, we cannot see our hand when held out in front of us. As we slowly walk around the space, however, we begin to trace the dimensions and shape of the room. We begin to understand the rules of the game. Composition then is the slow realization and reification of form within a bright fog of ideation. And so, I put my hand out in front of me and pick my first note, E. On soprano sax, that's of course a constant D, which unfortunately is the same note as I started my previous Deep Field 3 piece, but oh well. One day, one note, I earn my keep, onwards and upwards. Day 2. In 1995, the Hubble Space Telescope opened its lens on a nondescript patch of sky, about 1/10 millionth of the total area of the sky, and over 10 days recorded light from ever more distant objects. The resulting image, the Hubble Deep Field, or HDF, included some of the most distant objects ever seen, some over 12 billion light years away. This, like Yayoi Kusama's Fallius Field, evokes a kind of cosmic awe and melancholy at the incomprehensibility of the wheeling field of matter, space and time around us. I often wonder how astrophysicists interact with the monotony of daily life. Do they wander through supermarket aisles, staring at packets of breakfast cereal, unable to escape the knowledge that the cosmic pathway from Big Bang to supernova to zodiacal disk to planet formation to the emergence of carbon-based, self-configuring, self-duplicating helical structures to the arrival of cellular life to a head of corn has led to this box of delicious cornflakes, but will soon be followed inevitably by the heat death of the universe? In any case, the HDF provides me with ideas, shapes, trajectories, galaxies as grains of sand, the constant gravitational ballet of the shifting ground of our cosmos, the rotational orbital structures of blobs of matter suspended in space. The electronics themselves will inscribe orbital trajectories around the audience resulting from computer-controlled gain curves fed through an octaphonic array of loudspeakers from my granular synthesis algorithm called spindrift. But I'm also interested in applied rotation to the macro-harmonic universe of the piece. In Krenek's Lamentatio Jeremiae Prophetae of 1942, he uses a technique called rotation technique, which Stravinsky, Boulez and Nussen would later champion. In it, Krenek rotates a pitch series around itself, using the central pitch classes of F and B as anchor points for each hexachord to retranspose to. I will then apply this rotation to my own pitch series, one that peregrinates around an octatonic subscale. But this series will in fact become highly sublimated in a rather veiled vestigial manner by surface level inflectional deformations. In order to provide greater fluidity of contour and pitch and to avoid the pedal point effect that Krennic has with the fixed anchor points starting each series, I have devised two new rotation algorithms called rotational line chaining and rotational line steering. These use respectively the final pitch class from each rotation and the successive pitch class from the original series to provide the anchor points. And I also invert the intervals in every other rotation. When I apply rotational line steering, there's an additional fractal quality that attracts me. The transpositions of the series are provided by the series itself, creating a nested self-similarity which, while obviously imperceptible, gives us simultaneous perspectival depthfulness and depthlessness. Day 3. I meditate on rotation, or centripetality, or should that be centripetalishness? Anyway, I start a web of associations. Orbital mechanics. The Semazan or Sufi whirling of the Mevlevi order. The spin paintings of Alphonse Schilling and Damien Hirst. Gretchen Albrecht's Of Cloud and Sky. Stockhausen's Octophony. MacLeod's Intrinsic Spin and Scart's Zodiac of the Hours. Kagel's Translation Rotation from an issue of Die Reihe. Wishart's Vortices of Spatial Motion. Bode Corrier's Tout Pas Compas. George Crumb's Magic Circle of Infinity. The centripetal and centrifugal forces of the combined gravitational push and pull of the entire contents of the universe create cosmic filaments, massive web-like bubbly formations of baryonic matter with a typical diameter of 50 to 80 megaparsecs. The universe is, in essence, an unfathomably large beer head. Other web-like structures are seen in, Anthony Gormley's Quantum Cloud, or his other work, Aperture. Bryce Marden's studies using an ailanthus stick instead of a paintbrush. Cornelia Parker's Cold Dark Matter, a scintillating space-occupying piece of installation shadow puppetry sculpted from the remains of a Texan church struck by lightning, a bare bulb suspended in the centre like a distant supernova. The webby constructions of Tomas Saraceno. Georges Ligeti's story of his childhood nightmare of being trapped in a gigantic cobweb, resulting in works such as Atmosphere. Xenakis' interest in particle physics equations leading to filament web structures such as Pithepractor. In 1955, John Wheeler posited the idea of a quantum foam as the foundation of the fabric of the universe. He proposed that due to the quantum level indeterminacy fluctuations, the essential fabric of space-time is not a smooth, sustained, vibratoless pitch, but comprises many small, ever-changing regions in which space and time are not definite, but wobble in a foam-like manner. I think of the sound of the kawowo, an inherently unstable, always wavering pitch, subtle, inflected, fragile, and beautiful. In this manner, I conceive the saxophone piece as based around a high-level rotational macrostructure, but one that is perturbed, disoriented, and gravitationally lensed by microtonal deviations away from and back towards the central pitches, perhaps never quite returning to the same place twice. Day 4. Because of the soprano saxophone's sublime subtones and niente attacks, sustained tones will emerge and vibrate with energy from the patterning of microtonal detunings applied to each pitch. Furthermore, the electronics will be primarily responsible for sustaining previous pitches while rotating them in a counterpoint of orbital mechanics through the octophonic array of loudspeakers, creating a kind of automatic spatialized heterophony or resonance. The electronics will reify the harmonic implications of the otherwise single-note nature of the saxophone part, but with a twist. With the microtonal deviations that I'm going to impose on the serial structure, my aim is that the present will conflict with and energize the sonic residues of the past that have been sustained and re-presented, that is, re-injected into the present, but that will now conflict with the microtonal deviation. And when that happens, we get the psychological effect when two periodic patterns of near but not exact period overlap. That is, interference patterns, or moire. In both visual and oral senses, these create a patterned vibration that shimmer with intense psychological energy. This, of course, recalls the visual art of Bridget Riley and Victor Vasarely. Anyway, I stopped prevaricating around the bush and composed the first 2 pages of the piece. The music spills out from the confluence of the ideas that have been rotating, filamenting, and webbing around my head. Day 5. In string theory, space-time and quantum particle physics are represented by a Calabi-Yau manifold, which is a 6-dimensional topology with a vanishing first Chern class that is also Ricci flat. I haven't the slightest idea what that means, but it looks pretty. Actually, on second thoughts, I think it looks fundamentally unhappy, like a starfish turning itself inside out. It reminds me of the Klein bottle or the Ouroboros shapes that have no distinction between the inside and the outside. This particular Ouroboros doesn't look particularly excited about the current state of affairs, which kind of sums up the universe, really. I am reminded, however, of my desire to feed my pitch series to itself, to disrupt the distinctions between interior and exterior. Having said that, I plan the pitch series to return often to the note E, a kind of gravitational attractor that I plan to briefly unsettle by injecting a rogue tonal center of C that will appear later. Talking of shifting ground, as we've often done in this conference, it's worth noting that the Milky Way and our nearest neighbour Andromeda are gradually being pulled across the heavens by the gravitational attraction of the most massive structure in the observable universe, the Shapley Attractor, as it is known, leading to an inevitable future calamity somewhere over there. I'm also reminded of the Lorenz Attractor, which arises from a system of equations describing the 2-dimensional flow of fluid of uniform depth. Days 6 and 7, the weekend. Day 8. Returning to the filament structures from a previous diary entry, I had forgotten to include the liquid drippishness of Bill Hammond's Birdman canvases, these tenuous residua of their life force tying them to the ground below. Those drips are vagrant lifelines dancing to the poetry of fluid mechanics. In Greek mythology, the Moirae were keepers of the thread of life. Clotho weaves it, Lachesis measures it out, and Atropos perfunctorily thwacks it off with a pair of scissors. When my father died last year, I had just stepped out of his room at the hospice for a moment when Atropos visited. I've slightly lost track of the music today. Where is it going? Our own threads of life are fractal, however. We perambulate around from day to day, from week to week, from year to year. Our lives are like a Sierpinski carpet, a Koch snowflake, a Julia set, a Menger sponge, self-similarity in a depthless, eternal non-hierarchy. A butterfly flapping its wings in New Mexico will cause a hurricane of Romanesco broccoli on the coastline of Britain. Day 9. Question. When does ornamentation become subject? When does surface become macrostructure? Can the use of microtonal inflections become reified as structural or formal, or is this simply always inflectional? But what would Kowali sound like without vocal ornaments? It would be nothing. What would no singing, the blues, etc., be without the Barthian grain of the voice? What would Nate Silver say about the signal and the noise in music? Can we extract the signal independently from the noise? Is that what Schenkerian analysis is? Or in fact, have we lost the signal in the process? I'm enjoying the idea of the noise gradually becoming signal, such as the slow reification of ornamental structures taking on greater and greater significance as the piece progresses. Like Boulers's increasingly Baroque grace note groupings in Derive, so too I enjoy the gradual infection of ejaculaturas into the discourse of my piece. Days 10 to 12. I've abandoned this creative diary for the time being, as I need to ramp up progress, and this diary is not really helping. Anyway, I have managed to quickly sketch out 2 pages, and it helps that I've developed a fairly strong idea of where I'm going to, something I always find important. The form begins to take shape. In the middle of the work will be a central aporia made from a series of soft multiphonic dyads, sustained gently and distantly by the granular synthesis. Dyads are some of the most beautiful sonorities on the soprano saxophone. I impose subtle breath pulsations, which reminds me of the way exoplanets orbiting distant star systems transit the star, creating subtle shifts in light intensity. I discover to my delight then when the soprano saxophone dyads are sustained with the granular synthesis, they almost sound like a distant chromatic choir, a one-man band version of Ligeti's Lux Eterna. Days 13 to 14, weekend. Days 15 to 17, how to end. Long build-ups are my Achilles heel. I remember once that Gendel, probably emboldened by a few drinks, gave me a charming telling off for a particularly obvious one in a work of mine. Still, if Georg Friedrich can do it, so can I. I'm referring to textual build-ups and limited approximations, not BDSM. I return to this idea of the electronics acting as an ensembleization of a monodic instrument. I'll use a series of energizing static pitches and dyads to build up a quasi-harmonic series, but the central pitch class E will be recontextualized as the fifth harmonic of a C harmonic series. Days 18 to 19. I'm nearly there. I can feel the imminence of the final sounds. In my previous work, Deep Field 3, I discovered late in the piece how beautiful and ear-tickling is asynchronous granular synthesis of breath sounds, transposed down at least one octave, if not two or three. They have a deep cochlear impact somewhere in the inner core, almost something you feel in the solar plexus. I sketch out the final sounds. It's a little bit more rushed than I'd like, but at least I have got them down. Footnote in retrospect. When it came to the performance of this work, I found that almost everything worked, even without having played them on the soprano saxophone myself or listening to any MIDI playback in Sibelius, except for one note, the very last one. When Joshua played it, it didn't sound finished. I eventually realized it cannot be a C sharp. I don't know why. The note had to be changed to a D, and then it sounded finished. Go figure. Days 20 to 21, weekend. Thank you.